Welcome to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And I'm Cheta Wanze.
Cheta, rather than listen to you babble on about either football or whatever you want to talk about, we have a very important guest in our midst. And I'm hoping that you're able to behave today in his presence, Cheta.
I'll keep my opinions to myself. Good evening, sir.
Today we have Reverend Clive Foster, MBE, with us on the Black Paper. Now, Reverend Clive Daniel Foster, MBE, is the United Kingdom's first Windrush Commissioner, appointed by then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper in 2025 to provide independent oversight of the government's response to the Windrush scandal. Reverend Foster is a pastor at Pilgrim Church in Nottingham and founder of the Nottingham Windrush Support Forum. Reverend Foster spent years campaigning for justice for members of the Windrush generation before becoming the person responsible for holding the Home Office to account from within. The Reverend is the son of Jamaican parents who arrived in Britain in 1959 and has become one of the country's leading voices on Windrush justice, institutional accountability, and the need to ensure that immigration policies do not create the conditions that led to the scandal. He was awarded an MBE for his service to the Windrush generation before taking up the commissioner's role. Now, what makes Reverend Foster particularly compelling is the unique tension at the heart of his office. He's expected to advocate for victims while scrutinizing the very department that caused the scandal. He therefore occupies a rare position, simultaneously an independent public advocate, a faith leader, and a government-appointed commissioner responsible for ensuring that the failures exposed by Windrush are never repeated. Welcome to the Black Paper, Reverend Foster. We're very, very happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. And I don't mind talking a little bit about football if it needs to go into that, but we've got some important matters to cover.
Thank you.
Oh boy. Well, I see I'm outnumbered here, so I shall.
You're a minor minority.
Oh boy! See, this is what happens. But thank you for being here with us, Reverend Foster. Before we start, I think it would be good to just have a bit of your background before we go into the Windrush generation. I had mentioned that you're the son of Jamaican immigrants, and can you just let us know how your upbringing affected you, and just how it was growing up?
Yes, so I am second generation Windrush descendant. Both my parents from Jamaica. They came to this country. My father came in the late 50s. My mother came afterwards in the 60s. I am one of 5 brothers and 1 sister, and I'm the youngest. Often referred to it in Caribbean terms as the wash belly. And very much working class. When my parents came over, they initially came to the city of Birmingham in the UK. That's where they made home. And, we grew up knowing that, things were hard, but our parents did their best to make it seem great for us. And that was a privilege. I went to, comprehensive school. I had ambitions actually to become a bit of a pharmacist because I did very well at school in chemistry. So I, went on to pursue a career studying chemistry at university. And then I went into a number of roles away from science into IT. I liked doing that kind of a work. And I think growing up back then, in the like 70s and 80s, I became very much aware of the tensions that, were experienced from a race relations point of view. But our parents realized the value and the importance of education. And so we was always encouraged to be in school, stay in school, and try to do well in school. And so my background is one of growing up in an era where my parents had to go through those signs that were said in those days in accommodation: no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. And, they got through that phase. And I look back on my childhood, I have to say, and I feel blessed. I feel like I grew up at a time where I have good memories, but the reality is when you become a teenager that you're different, you're seen as different, and the equality is not the same soon dawned. And so that's a little bit about my story. And then I came to faith as a teenager and became a Christian, and that was very important for me. And that's where I met a lot of my mentors and was inspired around the issue of social justice and community, which was the foundation. Church, community, and family was the foundation for the work I went on to do as an adult.
Okay, thanks so much for that. I'm going to go a bit off script, sir, because you said something about your parents instilling ambition in you. And there's something that's happening. It's been the top news in the country for pretty much the whole of today. The new prime minister has made statements about sort of pushing children more towards technical education, as opposed to the universities. Now, for most families, most African heritage families, this is going to be a very big deal, because most of the kind of people who have moved from our part of the world are people for who things like universities is basically a big issue. So, what's your take on this policy, and how can our community navigate it, the effects, if there's going to be? Because the reason I'm bringing it up is there's a history of basically teachers in this part of the world, not just in the UK, but in the Western world, basically pushing children of African descent, whether it's Caribbean or whether it's direct African descent, into what is seen as the less the less desirable roles, basically. So this is a risk that I see could happen. What's your take on that?
So I think it's important to recognize, and I think this is what the government's trying to do, which I think many governments have tried to do, is recognize that some people's skill and talent lies outside of a direct academic pursuit. And so the technical skills, practical skills, that they want to ensure that those as it were, youngsters who may feel that they can't get through university also don't feel that they can't contribute to society. So I think there is still room for both to coexist, and to coexist very sufficiently, because I think some of the decision is on the demand of employers and the labour market, in terms of people are leaving university and they feel somehow they don't have some of those skills which they are looking for. So I hear you're right to talk about the risks and the concerns and the further issues it could potentially cause, but I think there is a recognition that both can coexist, particularly for those people who may not have a strong university academic background, yet can still contribute technically to society.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks for that answer. Because it's quite interesting, that question, because that announcement was formally, well, I won't say formally, but the Prime Minister was down here in Derby today. So he was at Alstrom, where he made that announcement. And what stood out to me watching videos from that announcement was that he was surrounded by a lot of apprentices, as well as people from government. But again, as I do in some of these things and getting ready for this program, I was trying to catch out or find out how many people were non-white, how many of the apprentices, and there was none. And just got me thinking about how in our community, whether we've somehow over egged the importance of, the university education as opposed to technical education, so that when opportunities like this open for technical educations, somehow, because we've not pushed the importance, because that joke of your parents was always wanting you to be either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, and it still that trope carries on, so that even when opportunities like this arise, we find that our community is not has not put itself in a prime place to take part of those opportunities. So it was just quite interesting. But just to go on, Reverend, so you've called yourself a man in a hurry for justice because time is not on our side. In your role as the Windrush Commissioner, first, can you just sort of like expand on that, what that role demands of you, and how being a man in a hurry for justice, how do you see that role helping you to achieve that burden, shall we say, that you feel, that you carry?
Yes, so I was appointed by the then Home Secretary, as you mentioned. It's for a 3-year term. I have to say it was a competitive process. So I wasn't just appointed from my background as a single person. It was I'm a public appointee, the first Windrush Commissioner, UK Windrush Commissioner. And that process came with it a very specific remit. My role as the Windrush Commissioner is to act as an advocate for those people who've been harmed as a result of the Home Office Windrush scandal, and to work with those survivors, to work with Windrush communities, and work with organisations that have been impacted by this. And my role is to act as an authoritative voice to scrutinise the government, to hold them to account in terms of the improvements, and advise them on the Windrush compensation scheme, the scheme that was set up to compensate for the harm that was done, and also to advise on the Windrush, what they call status scheme, that is the documentation scheme as well. My role as well, this is really important. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the story around the Windrush scandal, in that when it first broke, there was a report that was done called the Wendy Williams Lessons Learned Review. This had 30 recommendations, and this report, which was done by Wendy Williams, set out to address the cultural change that is necessary to ensure that something like the Windrush scandal never happens again, where people who had the legal moral right to be in the country were treated as illegal immigrants. Now, why am I a man in a hurry? Because this has now been happening, the scandal now, for at least 7 years. My term is for 3 years. I am now just starting year 2. A number of the people who have been affected by the Windrush scandal are sadly from a more senior age cohort. And indeed, one of the first recommendations that I made in coming into this role was that the Home Office should take a much more faster approach with the more senior age groups and more people who are more vulnerable, who are affected. That people who just come into the system should just sit in the queue if they are of a certain age. So those people who were like 75 and over and vulnerable, they go into a faster queuing assessment process. So the reason why I'm in a hurry is because, number one, we have an aging group of people who have been affected. That is not totally all the people, but it's definitely a significant amount that warrants that they're given a faster processing. And also there has been a number of blockages and concerns about the speed of getting specifically compensation and the whole bureaucratic process around that. So I'm in a hurry for justice to ensure that those people who've been affected get the justice in their lifetimes. And that's my biggest concern. And that's why I would use that. I use that phrase, and why my office is working to work with internally to ensure that there is that speedy delivery for justice.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's I mean that's a very thoughtful answer. That and I think that a lot of people don't grasp these gaps that you've just talked about. Now, what I would ask basically is, we're basically 7 years into a scheme that's still run by the same Home Office, which caused the scandal. There are hundreds of claims literally still unresolved. I think natural attrition is happening. People who came via Empire Windrush came in the area in the time that my parents were born, and my parents are in the twilight of their lives now. So we have more than 50 people who have died, and they didn't see a pen. We have a situation where claimants with legal supports are walking away with a lot more money than those without legal supports. So at what point does delay become a second injustice? Why is the government not funding legal supports, and why has the scheme not been handed to an independent body? I think the final question in this flurry of questions is, do you think 3 days a week is enough of your time to actually move any of this?
Great. Well, a number of questions there, so thank you for those. So just on that last point, I am not working 3 days a week. I am now working full time.
Okay. Well done.
So when I first started the role, just to say a little bit about my background, I was also working as an executive dean for Nottingham-Trent University as EDI. And I went into the role as a Windrush Commissioner initially at 3 days a week. I then subsequently, I think after about 4 months, went full time with the role. This is taking up my waking hours. There is not a moment when I am not the Windrush Commissioner.
And well done for that.
Indeed, because you're right to identify that the demand of the role and the need for it does require full attention. Secondly, a number of things that you mentioned. Number one, let's talk about legal support. Now, something I have observed when I went on a listening campaign is that people were telling me, and I knew this because my background, how I got into this role, is that I was a campaigner and supporting people when the Windrush scandal first broke. Through my own church, we set up surgeries. So I understood the terrain, as it were. When I became a commissioner, I had the opportunity to extensively go around the country listening to people across England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, in Wales. And I was hearing similar stories. And the stories I was hearing is that people were finding the compensation forms too complex. It was too long. There was too much a demand on the burden of evidence. And people were feeling that the trust element of this was being exacerbated by the complexity of the form. So I have called for fully funded legal support for the Windrush victims. And you're right when you hinted in your question about legal support, because there has been a report done by an organization called Justice. They have identified that the intervention and support of legal support as evidence that people who were receiving like 11K can go up to 85K. and people are telling me that they want legal support. I have raised this with the then minister. We have a new minister for immigration and citizenship now. And I called for this at the Public Accounts Committee meeting. And so my office is currently doing a piece of work where we're identifying the legal models that can be available to present to government, to present to the minister, because advocates are doing a tremendous work, but they can't do the work of a lawyer or a solicitor.
Mm.
And we have other compensation schemes, such as infected blood, Post Office Horizon scandal. They have funded support. And to be honest, some of the cases of Windrush are far more complex than in some of those cases. It's only fair that they should be getting legal support. So I'm in that process as we speak now, and we're doing an assessment to present to the minister for that. And I am currently working with Justice and a number of lawyers to make this case. Secondly, so that's the legal side. Secondly, you hinted at the service sitting with the Home Office who have caused the harm. Now, I completely agree that it can't be right that the persons who have caused the harm are now then dishing out the justice and being judge and jury, as it were. And I believe, and I made this point at the Public Accounts Committee meeting, that from the onset, and this committee meeting was looking at compensation schemes, that from the onset, the Windrush compensation scheme should have been independent of the Home Office from the onset, because we have seen that when that doesn't happen, it's like people marking their own homework. So I have said that, but what I am aware now, and I have to be really practical with people, we're now like some 7 years in, I am not confident that moving the compensation scheme out of the Home Office would only cause further bureaucracy, further delay, further harm to the very people that we want to help. So my position is that we need, and continue to put the pressure on the Home Office to change and reform the compensation scheme. That's why I've made the recommendations. But it is perfectly understandable for the calls for that. But to be practical about it, I just think it would create a further additional harm and bureaucracy that I am not convinced the Home Office could escape to do such a complex move.
That's quite an interesting way to look at it. And when you look at the toing and froing from especially the Ministry of Justice, things like the jury trials and an added level of bureaucracy that it might bring or might not bring, depending on where the argument is right now, one can see where you're coming from. But just to stick with the Home Office for a while, I remember when Andy Bonham was announcing his cabinet, and there was a lot of excitement, especially for those from our communities. And just a bit of a background: we are called the Black People, and this was started in response to Shabana Mahmood's white people. So. On immigration. So when Shabana Mahmood was announced as retaining the Home Office portfolio, I personally got a lot of messages, just saying, "Oh my goodness, what's going on with you and the Labour Party? Why is this happening?" And that's because there's a lot of apprehension, as you can imagine, in the community around her stance on immigration. Now, people have warned that with the current trajectory of the Home Office, that there's a risk that we might have a Windrush type scenario for migrants, especially those from the African heritage community. So I guess in the first instance, what I want to ask is, do you have, or how much faith do you have that this Home Office would be able to, not handle the Windrush scandal fairly and work well with you to make sure that happens, but B, not create yet another scandal in the waiting because of the seeming hardline stance, which people in the Labour Party itself, people like Angela Rayner, have said is un-British. So how much faith, did you have that this Home Office can maintain justice without creating yet another scandal down the line?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to say that my role is to hold the Home Office to account, because my role is about holding the Home Office to account and bringing the voices of those concerned into the decision making. So I want to say that first of all. So I have that remit, and to do that without fear or favour. The second thing I'd like to say is that, given that you've mentioned that, obviously, about the Labour Party and so forth, I'm sorry, but this is a manifesto pledge. This is my role. I didn't create this role myself. This is a Labour manifesto pledge that the Commissioner's role is there to ensure that it works alongside the government with the Home Office, that it delivers faster, equitable compensation, that those people who have been wronged as a result of being treated illegally, both in the UK and overseas, because the Home Office Windrush scandal, let's be very clear about this, this is an international scandal. It affects people right across the Commonwealth. And indeed, it's global in its impact. And so the party itself has made a commitment to that, and my role, working with other communities and interested peoples, is to hold the government to account on that. So my confidence is what's also written on paper and what has been stated publicly and committed to. Now, and then it's about, how do you engage with a Home Office, which we have recognised through the Wendy Williams report has got a lot of changes to do. Look, if you was to ask the Home Office, is the conditions that caused the Home Office Windrush scandal, are those conditions completely eliminated now? I mean, if you were to ask the Home Office that, I don't think they could honestly say, no, that is the case. And so it's going to be incumbent that there is the scrutiny, there is the commitment to hold them account for the Windrush scandal, and to ensure that something like it never happens again. And that speaks to the concerns that you've raised around immigration and the direction of policy. Because I've spoken to a number of people, particularly people, who are on a pathway to citizenship here in the UK. And they said, Clive, I'm concerned about myself and my family. We've been given indefinite leave to remain. We thought we was going to get this side of things. And, I have had these conversations with ministers. So I think the job is to continue in the democratic process, that it's fair and humane. That's what needs to be demonstrated here. And I think, look, we all know that there is a political dynamic when you're talking about other political parties and the way that they're going, and that there needs to be a response to that. But we need to have a system that is humane, that is fair. And I certainly am working on behalf of people to ensure that those voices to do that is heard.
Okay, thanks so much. I want to basically hold you on this because you have warned that there are unintended consequences from tougher asylum laws. And the government's own proposals basically leave people in, and you've alluded to this in your answer. The government's own proposals would leave people who were granted asylum on temporary refugee status reviewed periodically. There's this whole visa break thing that happened in March, which automatically refuses students visas from students from certain countries. Now, I want you to give a specific answer. Where is the line between a firm immigration system and one that is quietly rebuilding the conditions for another Windrush scandal? Are we watching the scandal reassemble itself in real time?
So I think we have to hold the government to account, and it needs to be tested. And I, as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe that we are fully there yet. I just don't believe we're fully there yet in terms of saying that the conditions are completely not met, in terms of saying that we've eliminated all the conditions that caused the Home Office Windrush scandal. It is extremely clear what the Home Office has to do to get itself right as a result of Windrush. That's why we had the Wendy Williams report. And there was a number of things. Number one, it must open itself up more to external scrutiny. It has to do that. Number two, its policies and its policies and processes must be objectively built on humanity and fairness. And so the conditions for all that stress testing, I very much believe that community-led engagement should be there at the beginning of these policy decisions as well. And so that it is done with humanity and fairness, and it is community-led, not just kind of called in and tested, when a decision's been made for policy, but at the beginning of that. So I'm not going to sit here and say that everything is perfect, far from it. But I think the job of holding the government to account collectively, and I think, voices and networks like yourself are part of the democratic process of doing that.
Well, thanks, Reverend. Now, I want to go back a bit to something that you also alluded to earlier when you said that this wasn't just a scandal involving people in the UK. It was a scandal it was a worldwide scandal. And even though we call it the Windrush, named after the Empire Windrush ship on which a lot of people came from the Caribbean to work on the invitation of the UK government to work in the system and to hold up the system, there were also other nationalities that were caught up in the injustices by the Home Office. So you had people from African Commonwealth communities, from the Bangladeshi communities as well. So what would you say to a Nigerian, let's just say Nigerian, seen as that's where myself and Tita are from, family listening to you, but who can't prove their parents' immigration status, but who somehow have been caught up in this scandal and who may think, well, this is just for those from the Caribbean and we have to wait for our own, maybe not scandal, but someone to look into our own community independently. What would you say to them? How are you reaching out to these communities as well, or is there a separate scheme for those who are not necessarily from the Caribbean?
This is a really fundamental and important point, because what has happened is that when the Windrush scandal broke and became into the public consciousness in 2018, the pictures that we were seeing, it was predominantly people from the Caribbean who were affected the African Caribbean community. And, they were doing the interviews, they were in the newspapers and the broadcasts, media. And the term Windrush brought those first migrants from the Caribbean. And there were some African people on the ship as well. But it kind of, as it were, cemented that it appears like it was only people from the Caribbean. Some people would think it's only Jamaicans, and it's not the case at all. It's not the case, because immigration law is immigration law that affects everyone. And the correct term that a immigration advisor it told me when I was first engaged in this work is like undocumented Commonwealth citizens. Yeah. So you've asked me about people from Africa. It's the same scheme. So my advice is have the conversations, and if you have any concerns, reach out to my office, the Windrush Commissioner. There are many organizations across the country, and you can find this on my website, that are situated that can give information about this. You're talking about what am my office doing? I'm actually going to be running an event specifically to highlight the numbers, the figures for Africans who have engaged in the status scheme and in the compensation. This will be taking place on Friday, the 21st of August at the in Tottenham Town Hall. And I can send more details to your network. But that's a public event, and with specifically focusing on getting information to the African community to let them know that if they have anyone who has had problems proving their lawful right to be in the country, that the scheme is available to provide documentation, and there is compensation as well, because it is about people from across the Commonwealth. And I'm very concerned that people see this as being something which is just for the Caribbean community. It is not. And there was one particular case where we had to support a lady called Hannah Dankwa from Ghana. And she had a problem, and where she was over in Ghana. She was been in this country for a number of years, and she got stuck out in Ghana for 4 months when she only went for a 2-day holiday, and she's trying to come back, and there was a problem. My office had to intervene, and we managed to get her over. But this was a lady from Ghana, and my office intervened in that. So I really want to say that please do not eliminate yourself because you are saying, well, this is just for those people who were senior from the Caribbean. It is not.
Yeah, I remember that story. And in fact, I remember we had wanted to cover it on one of the episodes.
Yes, we had.
But politics and news being what it is, something happened that just sadly pushed it down the agenda. But yes, I do remember, Reverend, that you got involved. In fact, I think it was one of your quotes that got me interested in that episode. But yeah, that's good, for people to know that, as you said, undocumented Commonwealth citizens. So it's just that we love to brand things and brand laws and brand
correct
scandals in this country. So which is why Windrush scandal has sort of stopped. But it's for those who have been affected by this undocumented scandal, really.
So I'm really listening to African communities. So this event I mentioned is going to be, at the Tottenham Town Hall from 2 p.m. on Friday, the 21st of August.
Okay. Well, once you're saying that info across, please, we'll be sure to push it out. Sorry, Chetan.
Thank you.
No, I wanted to just repeat that to our listeners, please. For those of you who are in London, especially, if you can make time, Friday, the 21st of August, 2 p.m., please be there. And once we get the flyer, we'll push it out. Okay. Now you're a man of faith. And you've been quoted as saying that, and I'm going to quote you directly. I don't want to live in a country where I'm made to feel I don't belong. How has your faith reshaped how you do this job? And how has the job reshaped your faith?
That's an interesting way to put it, Chet.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. Look, I have to say that the work that I've done in response to Windrush has evolved from my deep faith, deep commitment to God, and the sense of the importance of loving your neighbor as yourself. And I was being blessed to be brought up in a church where it was pioneered from Windrush leaders. Reverend Canon Christian Weaver at CBE, he came over from Antigua, and Reverend Rose Burrell, female pastor.
Sorry, Reverend. Sorry, will Christian Weaver be David Weaver's father?
Oh, we've got so far into the podcast and we mentioned David Weaver. It is David Weaver's father, yes, and Christian Weaver Jr. Yes.
Interesting, because we had David on earlier.
Months ago.
Yes, yeah. Operation Black Boat, yes. This is the same Weaver, an inspirational man and my mentor, and he provided that level of leadership, love of community, and helping people. And so for me, what has been really important when I took on the role was understanding, where I'm coming from. And faith has been my bedrock for that. I have to say that when I was appointed into the role, I got some surprises. I got some surprises in that I wasn't prepared for the level of public interest in me as a person in taking on this role. And I did get a lot of criticism. I still get criticism now, by the way, but that's by the by. But I did get a lot of criticism in taking on that role. And it was quite difficult. And it was I did have to look to my faith to keep me going, because it caught me off guard, to be honest. And so in that regards, that faith has been my driving force, and it just keeps me on a level, really, which is a degree of realism, which I think is really important in this role, because as engaging with political leaders, with the media, I can understand this term, the Westminster bubble. It can be a little bit unrealistic if you're not careful. So me keeping grounded in speaking to people who have been harmed and hurt, and recognizing that's what my role is and calling is, was very foundational. And then going forward the other way, how was, I guess, the role shaped my faith. I think it's taught me the importance of patience, the importance of learning to work across with different people with very different views. And still respect people. That is really important. So my faith has been foundational to keeping this work forward, because it was actually through the work of the church that we set up the Windrush surgeries and set up Nottingham Windrush Support Forum. And it was because people in our community had a little bit more confidence in the institution of the church than trusting Home Office, why they were prepared to come and to open up and to be vulnerable. And so I always recognize that in the ongoing work and building trust and the role that as faith has played in this and continues to play for me personally.
Yeah, that's good. And again, as you speak, you sort of like give us the inspiration for the next question, which is good. Before we met, it's quite interesting that we met in church. Well, not for a service, but the church network in Nottingham had organized a community surgery, as it were, because I remember coming there. There were people from the NHS, there were people from some from the fire service, if I remember. But a friend had said to me, well, working on the Black people, you should attend this event on this day, and I'm sure you're going to meet Reverend Clive there. But even before that, someone, when I was in advertising, two people actually had said, well, you know what, I know someone in the union in Nottingham that you should meet, because he talks a lot about the community, about equality and all that, and it would be nice to have a chat with him. And so you've been in that space, and I raise all this to ask what advice you would give, especially to those from African communities, because the Caribbean community, and I hate to make that distinction, because at the end of the day, we're all African heritage, aren't we? But so to say the Caribbean subsect, Caribbean, subsect, if I can say that, is a lot more engaged in community participation, either through churches or through community groups, than those from the continent. And but what we see then, and in my role as a counselor, an elected counselor, when I speak to people, they're like, counselor, no one listens to us, no one talks to us. And I keep trying to impress upon them that you can't stay in a bubble. You can't just stay in one place praying without engaging and somehow not using the platform you have, which is the church, but to build upon that platform to build a community machine that can advocate on your behalf. And as you do, have those community surgeries. So, I think it would be, what would be your advice? And is it the same, or is it your experience that the Caribbean subsect of the larger African heritage communities are more organized than those from the continent?
So there's that saying, isn't there, in the Bible, that faith without works is dead. And I think there is a combination of the importance of your spiritual life, whether that be through prayer and faith, and also the outworking of that in your normal life. And as I mentioned earlier, I was blessed to be part of a church which didn't separate that. It saw the power and the importance of that operating in the world. I think from the different communities, look, when you look back at the history of migration in this country, the more recent, because there's been Black people in this country for centuries, but with the advent of Windrush, a lot of the African Caribbean communities experienced racism, and then when people came over, more from, the continent of Africa, their experiences are slightly different as well. But I think the important thing I would say is it really is about finding your passion and recognizing that you can always get better and do more in a supported environment. I mean, that's what I would say. And I was pleased to hear you say you're pushing youngsters and people and they're saying, oh, I can't, no one listens to me or whatever. You have to get into a supported environment. You have to build resilience. It's not always easy. It doesn't happen overnight. There are people who have trodden the way before you, who you could get good advice from, and who've been there, seen it, done it, wore the T-shirt. And I would leverage all that. There's so much information now at people's fingertips. And I would encourage people to leverage the wisdom that we have within our own communities, and to seek to understand how we can better develop our communities. And also, I think the generations now will bring their own take on things, whether that's through technology, whether that's through the better awareness of mental health. But I think that for me, what's going to be important is being passionate about what is it that you want to achieve, understanding your purpose, and working and finding an environment where there are people who can help you to achieve that. And for me, the church has been one of those areas.
Okay. I'm not going to say so much for faith. I mean, there are a lot of questions that could be asked about interfaith relations and all of that. But I think that generally those of us who are minorities in the UK, whether we are Christians, Muslims, whatever else, we are in the same boats, especially given the rise of the far rights in this country.
Yeah.
But time is against us, so I would just ask a final question. When your time as Windrush Commissioner is up, what do you think you would want to look back and say, this is what I have changed? And what would you say to a young African heritage person in Britain who is convinced that both system is rigged against them? And is to bear in mind that when we say have African heritage on the black paper, we're talking of both people from African communities directly and people from the Caribbean.
Yes. So the thing that I would like to say, looking back after being the Windrush Commissioner, is that I have given some hope. I have helped people and communities to have a sense of justice, and that people feel that they have received a level of, as it were, dignity, for those who have been wrongly treated as a result of the Home Office rumor scandal. So for me, that is something that I believe my role is about, and that I have done that to the best of my ability, without fear or favor. And I can look people in the eye and say I've done that, and people can testify to that as well, whether it has worked, whether it's delivered, but I've given it my all. So that's just something that I think I can, I would want to be feeling I've left behind and to be satisfied with. And with regards to young people, I would say, look, you're only young once, and you'd be surprised how quickly it goes. I would say that, seriously, black people's blood, sweat and tears has built this country. Make the absolute most of it. You deserve to walk with your head held high, and you can achieve anything and everything if you put your mind to it. Is there going to be blockages? Are there going to be people who believe, who won't have the confidence in you? They will. But you keep going forward. You keep pursuing. And I would say, maximize your potential. You have every right, like anybody else, to achieve this on God's earth. And I would say, go for it.
That's a good place to end it, I believe. Thank you very much, Reverend Clive Foster.
It's very sound advice.
It's very sound advice, and it's been a pleasure to have you here. We've been at this for a while, so thank you for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to have a chat with us. And We just I believe that people will listen to it and have a better understanding of not just what you're doing as a Windrush Commissioner, but also how they, as people from not just the Caribbean but the wider African countries and the wider Commonwealth community, can benefit from the breadth of your experience.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the time with you both. Thank you.
Thank you for coming again.
So, Cheta, how did you find that?
So, I think he's, again, that's, I can't help but, that feeling that I had when we interviewed Mr. Weaver, the same kind of thing. He's tired, but he knows that he has to soldier on. That's the feeling I get, and it's basically gives a lot of context to someone like me about the work of bringing change to a system. Is it's not easy at all. It's not easy, and it's something that so I think the key thing that people have to learn, people have to pick up from that kind of from talking with people like Reverend Foster, talking with people like Mr. Weaver, is you will get knocked down, you will get tired, but you just have to get up again and keep on keeping on.
I mean, that's true, and one thing really that really stands out for me, as I mentioned while he was here, is when we met, first time we met face to face, it was in a church. They were organizing. They were having a surgery, to which the NHS, the fire authority, and other partners were there, coming to speak to them about how their interactions with the Black community is. And it's something I've honestly tried to make happen here in Derby, and it's taken a while longer than I had hoped, but I'm hoping that it will still happen. But it's, for me, he comes out as a true example of the power of organizing, the power of doing things as a community rather than just going it alone. Because if you go it alone, you're just one person. Yes, you might get your result, but that is you. However, if you go as a community, then people get to understand that there's a larger body, with the stake here. And if you're a politician like me, I'd always say to people, we think in numbers. We may not, we may not be the smartest. No, I've owned it now. I've owned it. I'm not going to run away from it, because at the end of the day, am I a carpenter? No, I'm a politician. But the thing is, we are thinking in numbers. So if you don't engage with us as a community, what you're saying to us is this number that can shift things doesn't exist. But when 50, 100, 200 people either write to MPs or to councillors or come together to hold surgeries and invite these people to speak to the particular concerns that affect you, when you do that, the MP is going to walk into that room, and immediately he sees that large number of people. She is not just seeing people; they are seeing votes, potential votes. So when you don't engage, you lose the power to negotiate and to at least drive your stake into the ground of policy and politics. So that's what I was saying. I know I keep saying it. I'm going to sound like a broken record saying it, but engage. Engage. Well, or scratch MP3 file.
Anyway, I think it was a good one, and for our listeners, we aim to have at least one interview a month. So continue to subscribe to the podcast. Our figures are growing. We thank you. We thank the feedback. I want to shout out to Bay 2 or 2K. You guys give us good feedback quite repeatedly, and I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thank you. And on that thankful note, Cheta, shall we call it a day?
For the week, yes.
See you at the next one.
See you at the next one.